Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to this segment of Coach Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day, where we continue with recitations from Gauri Kabir Ji. Today is the 23rd stanza and the recitation. Bin sat sati hoi kaise nari, pandit dekho hriday vichari. प्रीत बिना कैसे बदे स्नेहो, जब लग रस तब लग नहीं नेहो अरहाओ। साहिन सत करे जी अपने, सोर मैये को मिले न सुपने। तन मन धन ग्रह सौंप शरीर, सोई सुहागन कहे कबीर। So Kabir is using the metaphor of sati, the act of self-immolation that women were expected in certain strata, that women were expected to self-immolate on the funeral pyre of their husbands. So Kabir has used that image, that metaphor, to speak about bhakti, what is required. And he says, Bin sat sati hoi kaise nar. Now sat sati is laden with connotations. Sat means it comes from sattva, which is pure or chaste. It means existence itself, perpetual. It also means wakefulness. It means mindfulness. It means right knowledge. So it also is derived from Sant, Satgur. It also means absolute truth. Sati, one who is chaste. In other words, one who has overcome the ego. One who is alert, awake. So you see, Kabir has used these two words in multiple ways. There is layer upon layer of meaning here. But we will stick with the literal translation first, because that is where we ought to begin. He says, Bin sat sati hoi kaise nari, because he's pointing to the nari. Nari obviously is a woman. However, in bhakti writings, the woman, the feminine, is also indicative of the individual soul. So there you see the various interconnecting layers of meaning. So if we take the literal translation, because he's addressing the Pandit, again, the Pandit can be addressed at various levels. So let's see how this plays out. Bin sat sati hoi kaise nari, pandit dekho hriday vichari. So he's saying, O Pandit, reflect on this thought, think about it. Dekho hriday vichari, in your mind or heart, think about this. Bin sat sati hoi kaise nari, how can a woman be chaste if she is not faithful? You see, bin sat sati hoi kaise nari. So Kabir is questioning the Pandit, the interpreter of sacred texts, regarding what the true act of sati is. So he's questioning not only sati as a social practice, which had religious sanction, but in the metaphor, what he is saying is that the act of sati requires total devotion, it requires courage and determination and a willingness to die. At the physical level and in bhakti, to die to the ego. So this couplet is open to various interpretations. It can be interpreted to mean that without right knowledge, Sat or Satgur, one cannot know how to die on the altar of the self being the husband, the har. We have to keep in mind that the image of a bride, of a woman, or writing in the feminine sense, is very common in Gurbani. So here you are, is questioning what it is that it takes to be a sati. प्रीत बिना कैसे बदसने हो, जब लग रस तब लग नहीं ने हो रहाओ. The central idea. जब लग रस तब लग नहीं ने हो. So, as long as you, ras is the word that we must consider here. Because ras means taste. Kabir says, jab lag ras, as long as you have a taste. For what? For the other. In other words, as long as you have a taste for sensory satisfaction, tab lag nahi neho, you cannot develop love for the husband. So he's still addressing the woman, you see. He's saying, if a woman without love, if a woman has no love for her husband, how is she going to be attached to him? Preet bina kaise bada sneho. Bada, increasing. Sneho should be understood here as attachment. So preet bina, if you don't love your spouse, you're not going to be attached to the spouse. That's what Kabir is saying. So he's saying, as long as she's distracted by the other, jablag ras. So if a woman, since the context is of a woman, is distracted by another man, let us say, true love with the husband cannot develop. So here, if you look at this mystically, in a mystical sense, what Kabir is saying, as long as the ego is distracted by attachment to the sensory world, it cannot develop love for the herself. And then in this couplet, he says, Sahan sat kare ji apne, so ramaye ko mile na sapne. Sahan is a reflection, the wife, not the primary thing. So what Kabir is saying is, if you confuse the transitory for the real, sahan sat kare ji apne, in your mind, then you might as well forget it, because even in your dreams you cannot accomplish your goal, which is self-knowledge. So ramaye ko mile na sapne. So what is required is tan man tan grah saup sarir. Soi suhagan kahe Kabir. A woman is chaste only when she has surrendered herself, body, mind and soul, to her husband. In other words, when an individual surrenders oneself completely to the self. So there are many lessons to be drawn from this. One is that if you have a goal, which is self-realization, then you cannot just look around. You cannot be distracted. You have to have the courage. First, you have to have the courage, the determination, but also a love for that goal. Preet bina kaise badesne. Unless you like what you're doing, you're not going to be attached to it. So there must be a certain level of clarity of what it is that you're doing and why. And you must be fond of doing that. You must love doing what you are. That's key. That's in the rahau. And then you can't be distracted. Jab lag ras. You can't look around. You have to be focused. Because if you're not focused, you're likely to miss the mark. This is how Kabir has very beautifully used the image of a sati to explain how the soul becomes a sati, how the self is realized. Sahin sat kare ji apane, right knowledge. If you take this transitory existence for real, then you're lost. Then the show hasn't begun yet. On that note, until the next time, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.